All right, so let's continue our discussion now of asymmetrical arm balances. The first one we're going to break down is one of the ones that was in the class, and that one is called Ekapada Bakasana, or flying crow. Sometimes people call this mountain climber as well. Literally, it means one-legged crow pose. And so that's why I started us with Bakasana, symmetrical crow pose, because if you understand those key actions in your upper body, then doing Ekapada Bakasana or flying crow is going to make a lot more sense. In Ekapada Bakasana, there is still a lot of that leaning forward idea, and even more so now because you have one leg extended behind you, and so you have that weight back there, like trying to bring you back down onto the floor. So I was trying to show in the class that in order to take flight, even if I had my legs set up correctly, I had to lean forward a lot. It's really important before you do any of these arm balances that you open your wrists. That's the foundation of the pose. So all of the preparatory poses and movements for Bakasana apply to these poses too, because the base is pretty much the same. Your arms are down, wrists are extended, and you're bearing your weight on your arms. A preparatory movement for Ekapada Bakasana, which I find useful, is doing downward facing dog and bringing the knee into the nose a couple of times. And then you can bring the knee to the outside of the arm and start that process of feeling the knee on the outer arm and squeezing it in. And when you get the knee to the outside of the arm, you shift forward into a plank position. So you get more wrist stretching, more shoulder and core strengthening, and you're closer to the actual shape of the pose. So we did that in the class. All right, so in downward facing dog, we started here, and we had already warmed up quite a bit. But to really get the feeling of the pose and like a krama of the pose started, we brought the knee in like this. And this in fitness is called mountain climbers, right? You just go faster. But in yoga, you bring it in, you're slow, you pause. This gets a lot of that rounded feeling, shoulder and core strength. But then, like to get into the first krama, you would shift forward into like a plank, get the knee to the outside of the arm and squeeze in. It mimics the shape of the pose, coming out and doing the other side. So this is, at the same time, a preparatory movement and a krama of flying crow or mountain climber. I inhale as I go back, I exhale as I go forward. Okay? If this is really tough, but you still want to practice it, you could do that with your knees down. You could be on your knees and practice this kind of thing. This movement requires obviously hip strength and hip opening. So we did lizard pose in the class. I also incorporated hip circles in tabletop, which gets both. It helps you to explore your hip mobility, but in an active way. So you actively explore your range. To go beyond, to go further, once we have that feeling in our body and we can do that much or this much, we have to keep going forward. We have to shift forward more. And we had practiced that already, and we've practiced this shifting forward idea a lot. Just as a preparatory movement, you could be in plank and shift back and forth, back and forth. So to continue my progression, I would be here, and then I would have to shift forward even more, right? And then to go beyond that, I bend my arms like I do for crow, and I use my free arm, the one that doesn't have the leg on it, as a shelf. I use it as a shelf for my torso, which makes it's still a hard pose, but it makes it doable, at least for me. And I actually have to use my leg-free arm as they both bend and lower my chest onto my arm, and at the same time kind of aim my elbow into my torso. I think this is an important place to start learning that shelf idea, because there are other arm balances that use that same shelving. Let me do it with my right leg so you can see what I do with this arm to create that shelf. Right, so I got here, and then I bend my arms. And then for me, I'm gonna keep bending until I can connect. I can connect my elbow into my side. Okay? You could also try that on your knees as well. I mean, it's gonna be hard to take flight, but you can at least try that feeling. And then to actually get up into the pose from that ladder stage, it's a lot of pushing down into the floor to get that ground reaction force. So I have to shift forward a lot, really engage my glute in the back leg. Then I can touch down. And then to get out of it, I usually just lower my knee back there and then set the other one down and then do some shoulder extension, like taking the arms behind you somehow. The clasping can feel really good, which is the opposite of what you're doing in that pose. Again, because you have that leg back there, it needs to be active. It can't just be hanging out mindlessly. Poses where your leg is lifted, like three-legged downward dog, for example, or warrior three, or just being in hands and knees, and practicing having that mindful awareness of your leg is gonna help you when you get into flying crow, because you've already practiced this feeling here. So it's not just like mindlessly hanging back there and working against you. It's got to be active and strong and lifting up, which is why we did locust pose as well. We did locust on the floor with the legs lifted, and we did a whole bunch of three-legged downward facing dogs, which is the same feeling. Really mindful control of this leg that's lifting up. I sequenced this pose alongside the next arm balance, Ekapada Kondanyasana 2. The setup is really similar. What's significantly different about this pose is that the front leg is straight. It extends out. And so you've got this like split feeling almost, with one leg in front stretching forward and the other one stretching back as you are suspended in the air. The kramas to get into it are exactly like Ekapada Bakasana. However, you need to prepare a little bit differently or a little bit more, especially with your hamstrings. If you're gonna be shelving a leg and extending it out, you need to have more open hamstrings so you're not fighting against yourself. So we did Ardha Hanuman, which is half split. You had the opportunity to do that twice in the class, and then maybe to progress it further towards full splits. The closer you can get to that, the more free you're gonna feel in that pose, because your legs don't have to struggle to be apart like that. In terms of kramas, again, they're gonna be similar to Ekapada Bakasana. For this pose too, to get up into the full thing, you would have to set your legs up and then shift forward. You'd have to shift forward more and really engage that back leg and lift it up. I'm gonna be shelving with this same arm. It's gonna be shelved into my abdomen, okay? So on my right leg, I'd bring it up on the outside of my arm. I'd have to bend my arms, make the shelf, extend this leg out. I'm actually gonna kick the wall, so let me come closer to you. I make my shelf and then I got to shift forward. It's almost like I'm kissing the floor, and I really extend my front leg and the back leg. And then to come down, my back knee touches down, front knee touches down, and I can move on or take a rest. You don't have to exactly get into it that way. You don't have to start in down dog and be here. Another way you could do it is something we played with in class, which was being in this lizard pose, which is a really low lunge, which helps to stretch your hips in that like splits direction more. And we played with that feeling of shelving here. We played with, all right, maybe I can cut my heel, and maybe I can bend my arms and just play with that shelf, and maybe I can lift my foot up here. And this might be a place where you can practice stages of Ekapada Kondanyasana without having all that arm strength to deal with, right? This might be where you start your kramas. You might start in lizard, cup your heel, and then you gotta bend your arms. I'm pressing my upper arm into my leg, and then it can be free. It's not pointing exactly forward, it's kind of pointing out to the side somewhat. That front leg isn't pointing directly ahead like this. It's kind of pointing out this way, and the other one would be the same thing. So again, it's not like you're doing a perfect split. Like this leg is gonna be on my arm, right? So it's gonna be pointing out to the side. If you don't find the cupping helpful, it could be a proportion thing. You might just put the hand on the inside of your foot, squeeze the knee into your arm, and then try to extend it that way, kind of like you did for Titibhasana, or you might have done for Titibhasana. And you could practice this as a krama. Being in lizard, squeezing the leg or shelving the leg, bending the arms somewhat, and then extending the leg out. Because all that's missing now is my back leg being up and me being forward more, right? And then I would be in the pose. You can see how your face can come very close to the floor. In this pose, some people actually turn their face because it comes so close and look over at their foot. So I can actually turn this way, because if I look at the floor, I'm basically touching it, so I can look over at you guys. Really shelved on this arm, I'm trying to show you. Looking over, and then just tip back to touch down. I would go through these kramas slowly. These might be kramas you go through over a matter of months. I'm not saying this is all gonna click into place like the first day. This material is meant to be worked through over time in your practice and give you ideas of how to approach one of these postures and start to build yourself up into it. Always take breaks. If you feel like you're getting really tired to the point where you can't do anymore, you've got to stop. You've got to listen to your body. Even if there's more to the video, you know, that you want to practice, just stop. Make sure you take care of your body and don't push it too far. After workshopping strong poses like this, I like to come down, give my wrists a counter stretch and my shoulders a counter stretch, which is why after we practiced a lot of these, we took a break in the classes, and I always ended the classes with a restorative back bend because it counterposes the hard work that you did, all of the rounding you did in your back, gives you a chance to kind of passively open in the front and to get off of your wrists for a while. And the counter stretch for the wrist I liked was to open the hand, take hold around the wrist, like where the forearm becomes the hand, gently squeeze, help the hand into flexion, just nicely where it can go easily with my elbow relaxed. Pulling the skin down too. And then releasing, doing some circles. There's a lot of stuff going on in these poses, but at the bottom it's your wrists and it's your hands, so we got to take care of them. The next pose we're going to talk about is Parsva Bakasana. So we have side crow, literally, which has a lot of the same muscle actions going on as crow pose, which is the foundational pose, but the legs are both going off to one side and they are straight. For this pose, we have to shelf again, just like we did in Ekapada Kondanyasana 2. So we use one arm to shelf into our abdomen, and the other arm becomes the shelf for the legs. As a preparatory pose, you could do that downward facing dog curtsy movement, which is where you bend both legs, take them to the side, and kind of come in closer to your legs. I'll show you again. We did that in the class, or you could have played with it. So it's where you're in down dog. I'm just gonna move my arms so you can see. You would bend both legs with your knees together. You would turn them to the side like this, just to a comfortable degree, and my feet are turning that way too. So my pelvis is rotated, and then I would shift, like come closer to my legs. And I get a really big stretch in the side. Let me give you a side view. Downward facing dog. I could bring my feet closer together, bend my knees, take them both out to one side with my toes turning that way too. And then bend my knees more, press back, turn them the other way,
My pelvis is rotated, which is what's gonna happen in side crow, and then come down.
Because your hips are to one side, there's spinal rotation going on, which is why we did a lot of twists in that class. So I would have done some of those twists before I did this, and some side opening, which we also did. The easiest way to get into Parsva Bakasana is to start in a kneeling position. So the first step is I would come down into kneeling, and obviously that's a lot of hip, knee, and ankle mobility, and that's different for everybody. You could just squat down to your ability. You'd put your hands down like you would for crow, but then you're gonna rotate your body, basically like you just did in downward facing dog. You're gonna be turning like almost 90 degrees, basically. Your knees are gonna turn to one side. So I'll show you from a side view too, but let's just stick with this for now. Put your hands down, kneeling, and then you'd have to get that rotation in. You'd have to pick one side. So I would rotate, let's say, my knees to the left, like 90, and then this arm is gonna end up in my hip. It's gonna be a shelf for my hip. And then this elbow, where my knees are going, is gonna end up underneath this knee. And it's gonna be a shelf for both of my legs. So I would be down, I would have turned, so this is like Krama 1, and then I would have to lean forward and make these shelves and make contact. So I'd bend my arms a little bit, I'd have to round my back and come forward, my hip would have to come forward onto my arm. I really bend my arms, like pretty much like chaturanga. Bring my head forward towards you. I feel that shelf in my hip, and I feel that shelf under my knee, okay? My face is turned over here. I'm not looking at the floor. And this could be like Krama 2. Let me show you from the side. Hands down, kneeling. Gotta turn my body. Gotta bend my arms a lot. Come forward and make contact. So with this arm, that's what's happening. With this arm, that's what's happening. All right? So I would have to rock, make contact, and then I'd have to just keep leaning. I'd have to keep leaning, lift my feet up, and then I'm basically in the pose. You might touch down and you could go into another arm balance after that, which is called fallen angel pose. So you could make it look like it wasn't a mistake. But you might put your blanket down there. If you do tip forward, you just gotta keep the muscles in the side of your neck, keeping your head up. And once you're able to balance there, you can extend your legs out straight into full Parsva Bakasana. You could really call it like rotated crow. It's called side crow because your legs are to the side, but it's like a big rotation in your spine. So once again on this side with this view, squatting, rotating, bending the arms, shelving, the legs stay together, lean, grip the mat with the fingers. The legs take off, and then I can extend them out. Keeping that shelf. To come out, I would bend my legs, touch down, press up. And then I would do the other side, maybe after some wrist release. I was half joking that if you were in side crow and your head just lightly came down and touched the floor, you could just come into another arm balance from there as well, which is arguably easier than side crow because your body would be a little bit more vertical to gravity, and it's called fallen angel pose. The Sanskrit name for this pose is Deva Duta Panasana, which is a very lovely name. Literally, that means a divine messenger of wisdom. And somehow it became known as fallen angel. It's like fallen side crow pose, basically. So for example, let's say I was in side crow with my legs bent, and I had made it that far, but then my head touched down. Well, I could keep my bottom leg bent and then extend my top leg up or out, right? The more I can aim my foot up,
and this foot can aim more up too, the easier it is for me to stay here. This is fallen angel pose. You can bend the legs, come back up, and plop down. So if you did end up like lightly tapping your head down, you could play with that idea, fallen angel pose. What that one really does is challenges the side of your hip, the one that's reaching up, because it's a lot of glute med strength. You could lightly come down, keeping the bottom leg there, extend the top leg up. And I could even lift my head up again if I wanted to. Fallen angel pose. Bend the leg, come back down. Side crow is really similar to Ekapada Kaundinyasana 1, which has that bottom leg exactly the same as side crow, but the top leg is extended back. And because of that, really all that you need more of, or what's different about it, is that back leg needs to be lifted and strong so that it's helping to keep you elevated and it's not gonna make you plop back down onto the floor. It's a lot of glute strength, glute max and glute med, which you can work in locust, which you can work in those hip circles we did on all fours. The easiest way to get into Ekapada Kaundinyasana 1 is from side crow, because you're like 90% of the way there. So the kramas are really similar. So let's go and walk through that. I would squat down, get my hands down, rotate, make this shelf lean forward. My bottom leg would stay shelved and straight like this, but my top leg would release and extend back, strong. This is Ekapada Kaundinyasana 1. To come back, I would bend my legs and touch down. So you can see how, in order to free that top leg, I've got to lift it, which is glute strength, and extend it back. I guess you could even consider Ekapada Kaundinyasana 1 like a progression of side crow, since we're basically passing through it. Lean forward, extend the shelved leg. Extend the back leg strong. They're both very straight. Bend, bend, come down. Untwist, just like you did for side crow. As a way to strengthen that feeling, then you could come to the side and do some side leg lifts, just free like this or with a strap, which is called Vishnu's couch. So you'd have the strap around your foot and you would be holding it like this. Or you could simply do side lying leg lifts so that you can get exactly that feeling of this leg being extended, strong, mindful, and what's involved. And what is involved is directly right here. This is where I feel the work. And you could couple that with locust pose, right? Lifting the back leg. Maybe you were down. These would be great preparatory movements for Ekapada Kaundinyasana 1. Because these are strong rotations in like the lower mid part of the back, towards the end of practice or the end of class, if we're doing more twists, I like to focus them on the upper back area because you've already done a really strong active twist in Ekapada Kaundinyasana 1 and in side crow 2. So that's why I had us come onto our sides completely with the arms around the head and open, close, really to get the twist at the end into the upper part of the back, which perhaps didn't rotate as much as the other parts of the back did. Another arm balance with a really strong connection to pigeon pose is called Galavasana. It's like flying pigeon pose, basically. And this one necessitates that pigeon movement for sure, because this is gonna be the shape of one of your legs. It's gonna be rotated externally like this. So when we're talking about Galavasana, we're really talking about all of the movements of pigeon. To prepare pigeon pose itself, you could even do reclined pigeon or figure 4, like at the beginning of class or an earlier phase, to get this movement in the body. practice something like this, which is really similar to the shape of what Galavasana is going to be, at least with this leg, this top leg. If you were creating a sequence, you could even incorporate this figure 4 movement into your sequence and then add core work or more of the upper body shape to mimic Galavasana. So you might take the arms up, maybe connected or clasped, and then you could exhale and lift up, right? And just play with combining these movements. Stretching through the legs, engaging through the core, and again, you're mirroring more of what's gonna end up happening in the actual arm balance itself. And of course, at this point, we know that the other preparatory movements come into play here, because it's an arm balance, you know, strong shoulders, plank plus, forearm plank plus, where you're pulsating like that. All of that is still helpful, all comes into play, all is helpful for Galavasana. It's just different variations with the legs, right? But all those fundamentals from crow pose apply in all of these that we are talking about. Actually get into Ekapada Galavasana, the easiest way to get there is actually from standing. I'm just gonna show you from this frontal view. The basis of this, what we're gonna be doing is chair pose, but we're going to take one leg at a time into that figure 4 shape. So that would require balancing, and you would take one leg up like this and help this leg into that figure 4 shape. And then we would come down into chair. This is not an easy thing to do because you're balancing, there's lots of leg strength, and you have strong external rotation on the other side. But anyway, you would be here and you would be squatting down, and I'm not gonna do anything with my arms because I'm gonna need to get them on the floor. This would be like one of the earlier kramas because this is how most of the time people get into this pose. So I would be here and then I have to get my hands down to the floor. And because I don't want to bend my leg anymore, this one, I'm going to bring my hands down like this. And did you see how I had to hop this foot back to get it into almost like a downward facing dog kind of shape? And then from here I would have to get this shin into my arms like this basically. I'm gonna come up and show you. So this shin, the one that's crossing over, I'm gonna have to lean forward in that pose as I bend my arms and create a shelf like this. So I'm actually resting my leg and pushing it into both arms. And it feels a lot more secure if you can flex this foot. When you're doing this, this foot stays flexed and you can kind of grab it. You can kind of grab your arm with that foot that's hooked like that. This is also something you could practice in seated. You could be in this pose. It's a strong stretch because I'm very close to my shin here. But you could practice taking your bent arms and creating that shelf here, which is essentially what's going to happen. So let's come back, taking it over, figure 4. I'm coming down. I'm not worrying about squatting all the way down, but I'm actually gonna hop back a little bit to get my hands flat. My ankle is still above my knee, so it doesn't slide down. And now I have to lean forward and bend my arms and create the shelf. And then I have it. I've got my shin on my elbow, and I'm wrapping my foot around this arm. To get off the floor, I would have to lean forward even more. But this is a lot right here, and this might be where you are for a while. Once you've gotten all that down, you'd have to really lean forward a lot more, extending that back leg to get it off the ground. And that's full Ekapada Galavasana. So I decided to add the blanket for myself on this other side because my left hip doesn't externally rotate quite as much as my right hip. This knee likes to come back towards my body a little bit more because this is more external rotation, right? So it likes to come up and kind of pop off of my arm. So there's like this tiny little space because my leg doesn't comfortably externally rotate like that much more. It's not very comfortable for me. The blanket like in my hip and over my knee really helped. And if you wanted to try this, then I like these Mexican blankets, these yoga blankets, or you could just get like a really thick blanket. And I would put this in your hip crease when you are coming down into the pose in that squat, because your hips can like trap the blanket there. So on that side, when I'm coming down, I could be here, put the blanket over the hip that's up, right here, draping over. And then when I come down, it gets like trapped, it gets stuck in here, which is good because it'll help me keep that external rotation. This is a humbling one for sure, and I'm glad that I was able to show you the use of a prop here. Even if you have enough external rotation, using a prop like a big blanket could just make it more easeful when you're first starting to practice this pose. So for dragonfly pose, Parshva Bhuja Dandasana, it's basically a blend of the movements from flying pigeon and side crow, just put into one pose. And in this one, you've got that same strong external rotation thing going on. And you're gonna be using your arms, but you're gonna rotate your body just like you did in side crow. A good preparatory movement for this is that same figure 4 shape, but you would create your shelf a little bit differently. We talked about how you would sit like this and being upright if you could, right? Because this is harder than this is. And we created our shelf like this to practice. Well, in dragonfly pose, this leg is doing the same thing, but our upper body is going to be rotated quite a bit in the same direction as the sole of your foot. Okay? And this time, the sole of your foot makes contact with the arm on the opposite side. So you'd have to rotate and make contact. And of course your hands would be on the floor, but this is basically the setup for dragonfly pose. And this is a place where you can practice it without all of that shoulder stability and core strength. The asymmetrical arm balance class that we did should be pretty much sufficient to help you warm up for this, but these other preparatory poses you could of course add in or do a little bit more of if you're going to workshop one of these poses. Of course, since there's a strong rotation in this pose, of course you want to warm up with some twist and some side body opening, which we did. You could also do a twist like this, where you're in a low lunge. Put your hand on one knee, like above your kneecap, and then push down and rotate like that. Here's on the other side. Or you could also do it with the back knee up and twist up like this. Just a way to get some twists in before you do arm balances like this, where you rotate a lot. The kramas of this pose, or the stages of this pose, to a certain point, they are exactly the same as flying pigeon pose. Starting and standing, taking that figure 4 shape, squatting down in it, but then we rotate our body to get the hands down and lean forward like that. So this one is the last one for a reason, because it brings a lot of these elements together and it is quite complicated, but now you will already have a sense of what to do if you have practiced flying pigeon beforehand. Let me walk you through the kramas. You would take one leg up, cross it over into figure 4, sit back. This is something that you could do on its own though as a preparatory movement. Chair by itself, or this figure 4 balancing. If you're sequencing, you could also put something like this in the sequence. But you would have to get that first, get the hands down, little squat, just bow down until you can get your hands on the floor. This is going to be a lot easier if you can squat down closer to the floor safely. So as long as I get my fingers down first, I can squat down. But this is a lot to ask in and of itself. This is a lot of hip flexion, knee flexion, a lot of ankle mobility to get down here like this with my leg crossed over. But you don't have to squat down that low. It just makes it easier. You would squat, you would then maybe get your hands down first, walk them over, see if that's possible. Get your hands down. And then from here, I've got to find a way to contact this foot onto my upper arm, this one. So I might have to move my arms back a little bit to do that. And then this elbow, this one, is gonna have to come into my hip here, just like it did for side crow, okay? So I'm using my arms as a shelf. This one for my hip, this one for the foot. Trying to aim your arm at the bottom of your foot, and then you'd have to lean forward, okay? I have to lean forward a lot. My other leg can come up and extend, just like it did for side crow. To come down, I would bend that straight leg, plop down, uncross, and derotate. And I would definitely take a rest after that and do something symmetrical, lying on the back, because that was so many strong movements going on. Again, the best way to practice this is just sitting to see if these things are possible for you. You know, can you get the leg up here without fighting your body too much? And then is it possible to cross your arm over like this to make a connection? Not with your elbow, it has to be your upper arm. So do you see how I have to lean forward and round? So it's hard. You're flexing your back, but you're rotating it at the same time. Like this, basically, is what it is. Okay, then I have to rotate my upper body towards this foot. So only so far I can do that, and then the rest of the way I would get by bending my legs and coming down a little bit more, right? So like, do you see how I can aim my foot at my arm more if I can bend my leg and come down, get my hands down? I have to really round my back. And then it's side crow time, basically, trying to get this elbow into my hip. My foot is now connected to my arm. I gotta lean forward this way, bend my arms a lot. Lean, come down. Has to be just right. Lean forward a lot, a lot, a lot, a lot. And you can extend. Still leaning forward, using my hands. Bend the leg, make contact, come down. So you could put blocks, sturdy ones, at their lowest height underneath your hands, so you wouldn't have to like lower down as much to get your hands to the floor. Put them on your mat so they're not gonna slip. You could even have done this for side crow, right? Just so you don't have to like lean down as much. You get this much of a head start up into your arm balance, but you will be up higher too. So you might have those there to begin with, and it might make this part a little bit easier, a little bit. You wouldn't have to like go down quite as far. You could be here, get your hands down and use the blocks to help you. And you could even, instead of like going forward like I did to aim my foot at my arm, you might even walk them back a little bit. Like I need to get this onto this somehow. And I could either move my foot there and keep my hands grounded, or I could move my hands back to try to aim this more where I need it to be. And then I'd have to sit back, obviously. Yep. And then lean down, be on the blocks, and come up. And my arm is like this. It's like in my hip. It's really in there. So this concludes our section about arm balances. I would, use this as reference material and progress through these slowly and maybe in the order that I offered them, because as you can see, a lot of those principles and movements kind of build upon each other in these. Maybe pick one and practice with that one for quite a while until you are comfortable with it, and start to incorporate some of the preparatory moves for the poses you want to do. Just because you're not going to move into that particular pose yet doesn't mean that you can't start preparing in an earlier phase. So we're going to move more of our attention to
poses that get off of our wrists finally and off of the shoulders and are less like strong in this way and more flexibility focused. So I will see you on your mat for our next practice to prepare for those poses when you are ready.